morning, I want to talk a little bit about solidarity. You may ask, why, Russ? Do you want to talk this morning a little bit about solidarity? Well, bear with me, and hopefully all will be made clear. There are two ways, typically, we think about solidarity. And when we think about it, first of all, what do we mean? What does it mean to be in solidarity? In solidarity with or in solidarity among others? Solidarity is this identification with, but it also implies a commitment to a community of people. We are in solidarity with other human beings. And so what makes solidarity something more deep, more profound, more engaging than simple relationship is a commitment to a community of people, but also a willingness to sacrifice for the greater good. And I think this is part of what gives solidarity so much power. Human beings, in general, operate from self-interest. Now, I know that's a heavy thing to say. And again, it may not be true for you. I don't mean to suggest that it is true. However, I think in general, our human survival, we often are motivated by self-interest. But solidarity, if we are in solidarity with or in solidarity among a community of people, there isn't just this identification with and a commitment to, but also a willingness to sacrifice for the greater good. To perhaps sacrifice self-interest for the good of, the interest of this other community. You with me? Yeah. Okay. So, the first way then that we think about solidarity in general is solidarity with. To be in solidarity with another community. So let me give you an example of what that may mean. So, I am not gay. I am straight. Just wanted to give you a time to object. However, I strive to be in solidarity with the LGBTQIA community. The difference, you see, is I am not a member of that community. Not a member of that community. However, I hope to see that community flourish, to overcome ways in which the larger culture and the larger world, they experience oppression, violence, exclusion because of their identity as members of the LGBTQIA. So, to be in solidarity with them is more than just saying, I support you, or posting something on Facebook that says, I support you. Solidarity, again, implies a commitment to and a willingness to sacrifice for. But this is key. I don't get to decide whether or not I'm truly an ally of this community. Only the community can confer that back on me. Because part of being in solidarity with a community, for example, that I am not intrinsically or inherently part of, means not stepping in and trying to dictate to that community who they are, what they should do, how they should act. To be in solidarity, for example, with that community means that as that community self-defines, as that community makes decisions about how they will act for justice, for themselves, for inclusion and acceptance for themselves, that I, as solidarity, I am a follower with that community. They take the lead, and I follow with them from that posture of commitment, but then also, again, willing to sacrifice for. So you might say, well, Russ, what does that look like? What is how do you sacrifice? Well, I just have an example which on the one hand may seem trivial, but on the other hand proved for some people to be very powerful. When I was in seminary in Chicago, Illinois, this was, I guess, doesn't matter. In the summer, there's the huge gay pride parade in Chicago. And it is a parade. Now, I mean, it's a huge event, huge event. Representatives from my seminary, Seabury Western Theological Seminary, we vested, we carried an Episcopal flag, we carried banners that said, "The Episcopal Church welcomes you." And we marched in the gay pride parade. We then, by self-identifying as a Christian community, set ourselves up to receive blowback from other people who self-identified as Christian, who vehemently disagreed with our presence in that parade. And using language that we won't use in this holy place. So there was a very real threat of violence, particularly against those of us seminarians. It's one thing to have floats and demonstrations and parades. It's another thing to have a church, a denomination, publicly marching in the midst of all of this, saying, "We welcome you. We stand with you. We are willing to stand with you and risk the abuse and perhaps even the violence that comes with taking this stand." So, again, a big sacrifice? No. But a sacrifice willing to, in a sense, publicly put ourselves out there to say, we stand in solidarity with this community. So, that is solidarity with. I'm going to give you one other example. They said, well, Russ, do we really need two? Well, okay. However, the same thing, I think, is true. You may notice that I am not a person of color. Well, I guess you could call me a person of color. I'm white. But in the popular cultural discourse, we tend to identify people of color in this culture as African American or Hispanic American, right? We understand that we are juxtaposing with European American. So my ethnicity is European, really European, profoundly European. Northern European. I come from the whitest people on the planet, okay, if you want to just go by skin color. However, I and the Episcopal Church, we claim to be in solidarity with the struggle of communities of people of color who, after more than 400 years, are still struggling for equality under the law, equity, financial equity, to be recognized as full citizens of this nation, but more than that, to be recognized as fully human people. And that's still a struggle. I know there are lots of voices out there saying, we live in a post-racial world, in a post-racial America. Lots of voices out there trying to say, listen, this is over, and the people who are trying to stir up are the ones causing trouble. Well, That's a way of just turning a blind eye to much of the suffering that takes place along ethnic and racial lines in this country. It's irrefutable. Let's just be clear about that. It's irrefutable. So I'm not a person of color. So nevertheless, if I, the Episcopal Church, we claim to be in solidarity with communities of people of color who seek equity, who seek equality, who seek justice in the world, then there's not only an identification with, a commitment to, but more than that, there has to be, I've got to have some skin in the game, so to speak. And I use that intentionally. Have to be willing to sacrifice. Well, sacrifice what? Privilege. Privilege. The things that happened. A month ago, I got stopped for speeding on a dark road. I know, you couldn't believe it. You were like, Russ, you got stopped for speeding, but you're our spiritual leader. How can we trust anything you say to us? Well, it's a good question, and we'll talk about that later. But I got stopped for speeding, which I was doing. I was speeding. They got me. Okay, you got me. But I wasn't afraid. I wasn't afraid when these two white police officers came up to my car on a dark street way up outside of Hockessin without witnesses. I was fine. I was making jokes with Mikey. Not in front of the police officer, obviously. But nevertheless, I wasn't scared. Not at all. Very different experience. Very different experience than some other folks have. And this is not an indictment of the police. Don't misunderstand me. What I'm saying is, we still live in a racially charged world. And there's differences. So, if I'm truly in solidarity with the communities of people of color, then I have to be willing to give up some power. I have to be willing to give up some privilege. I have to be willing to share, maybe to sacrifice, for the greater good, for the common good. But these two examples, I think, are powerful ways that we can be in solidarity with communities of people who are organized, who are struggling, who are seeking to live peacefully and fully in the world. Communities that we are not part of. And I want to recommend this. This is a powerful way of being in relationship with those who are, maybe we identify as different than we are. And yet, there's still another way of solidarity. We've been talking about solidarity with, but there's solidarity among. And solidarity among is when we are a member of a community because of ideology, ethnicity, personal orientation. To be in solidarity among means to stand with others like ourselves. We see this community. So if I were, for example, homosexual and I was involved in the LGBTQI community, in this case it would be solidarity among. I would be standing with sisters and brothers like me who share an identification with this community, who share a deep and profound, a real commitment to this community, who share a willingness to sacrifice, to give up, to sacrifice for this community. And there is an element of choice in this. For example, I am not in solidarity with white supremacy. I could be. Look at me. I could be. That could be a choice. I could stand with the neo-Nazis. I could stand with the tiki torch guys. I'm wearing khaki pants. That's one of my choices. And that would be solidarity among. That would be solidarity among. But no. I'm not joining those guys. Are you kidding me? White supremacy? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I will challenge white supremacy with every fiber of my being. Every fiber of my being. Because there's no truth in it. And the violence, the horror, the history. However, there are communities where I am in solidarity among. One of them is St. Anne's, this community. Yeah. What we prepared to do for one another. Commitment, identification with St. Anne's, maybe the larger Episcopal Church. A commitment to a willing to sacrifice. A willing to sacrifice. One way is, for example, if you raise your pledge, give us more money. But there can be some hard realizations at the end of the year if we look at how much did we give to the church, to the charity to our neighbors, and then how much did we spend at Starbucks? I'll just leave that to your own Lenten reflection. So there's the power of solidarity with, and I think then the power of solidarity among, coming as one of us, standing up as one of us. And here's why I'm talking to you about this morning. I promised we would come around to it. God has the option of responding to human suffering from the perspective of solidarity with. To say, I'm God, I'm completely other than you, but I hear the cry of my people. I see your suffering. The great litany, a long sermon. I see your suffering. But I'm way up here, and you're way down here. And so I will identify with you, commit to you. I may even sacrifice a little bit, whatever that might mean, for God, from God's throne, in the kingdom. I can do that, but it's up here to here. And it's not a bad thing. Don't misunderstand me. Think of it this way. When Katrina hit New Orleans and Mississippi and that part of America, right, how many of us donated to alleviate the suffering? That's solidarity with, and it's not a bad thing. But it's not the same thing as solidarity among, which is what God chooses instead. Instead of staying in heaven, instead of relating to us over a vast distance, keeping God's self separate from us, no, God makes the other choice to come in solidarity among, to come in solidarity among us. The revelation of God in Jesus Christ is the revelation of the God of the universe, that which is inconceivable, unimaginable. Trust me, our minds can't even begin to comprehend the God of the universe. And yet the God of the universe, seeing us in our suffering, seeing us in our struggles, seeing us in our pain, says, I'm not going to just stay in this vast distance and just, throw a little grace your way. No. Just the opposite. God comes down among us. God comes as one of us. God comes in the person of Jesus Christ, a fully human person having a fully human experience, feeling what we feel, seeing what we see, experiencing what we experience. And God doesn't have to do this. Does God have to do this? No, because nobody gets to tell God what to do. So this is God's idea. This is what God does. This is what God chooses. I'm going to be human. I'm going to be human. And I'm going to come among you. I'm going to walk among you. I'm going to live as you live. And then we might ask ourselves the question, talk about identifying with. Talk about a commitment to. Now, in the story of the revelation of God in Jesus Christ, is there sacrifice? Does God give up anything for you and for me? Does God show the depths of God's commitment to you and me by what? By allowing all of the evil and the violence and the hatred, all of the ways that humans divide ourselves and seek to grab power, acting from self-interest. God takes all of that into God's self and dies a horrible and bloody death on the cross. And all we have to do is look at the crucified Christ to answer the question, does God sacrifice for you and me? Does God give up God's self for you and me? Does God set aside who God is and what God can do? Jesus says in the Gospel of John, do you not think that I could call on my Father and get 12 legions of angels? Well, God doesn't need 12 legions of angels. Just one, trust me. Okay? And we're done for. What's that? Yeah. So, the sacrifice freely offered. And that is what we see this morning at the Jordan River. If we ever doubted that God comes among us as one of us, that God comes in solidarity among us as one of us, just look at this scene at the Jordan River, where Jesus is there in the crowd, this huge crowd, people lining along the banks, people down in the Jordan River. There are those who are watching, those who are listening, those who are participating, confessing their sins, lining up to come and be baptized by John. And this is not a gentle baptism. This is John the Baptist, okay? The beard and the hair and the camel's hair, a little bit of locust, a little bit of honey in his beard. He's grabbing people, right, just coming through as they're confessing their sins. And we might say, well, Jesus doesn't have any sin. That's not the point. The point is not whether or not Jesus has sin or not. The point is that God in Jesus Christ has come among us and is standing in line as one of us and experiences John's baptism as one of us to show us at the beginning of this narrative that Jesus Christ, the Son of God, is here for you and me, the God of the universe, born into the world in solidarity among us, the God of the universe identifying as one of us, committed to our healing and salvation, sacrificing God's own self on the cross for our redemption and salvation. This is who God is. This is what God has done. Come in solidarity and not leaving us orphaned. But as we hear, as God the Father has ripped the heavens apart, and that's the language in our gospel today, ripped the heavens apart, they never close back up again. And always now, God's pouring God's Spirit into the world, pouring God's Spirit into the world for you and for me as one of us, so that we may know the grace and the love and the blessing and the healing and the very salvation of God, so that we may know that. And then in solidarity with our neighbors, whomever they are, legal, illegal, gay, straight, person of color, European descent, male, female, whatever. It doesn't matter to God, therefore, it should not matter to us. Amen. Thank you. I dig that. Shaking off those icicles, Episcopal Church. Yeah, amen. So God comes among us to save us so that we are then empowered to live in solidarity with our neighbors, whoever they may be, identifying with them, making a commitment to them, and being willing to sacrifice a little bit of our own self-interest for the greater good, for the common good, for the good as embodied by God in Jesus Christ.